May 30th, 1942. Pearl Harbor, Navy Yard. Oahu. The air smells of oil, salt, and scorched steel. It is just before dawn, and floodlights glare against the wounded hull of the aircraft carrier USS Yorktown. Less than 3 weeks earlier, she had limped away from the Battle of the Coral Sea trailing smoke, her flight deck scarred by bomb hits, her frames twisted by explosions that should have sent her to the bottom. According to Japanese intelligence, she was finished, at best, months from fighting again. At worst, already sunk. On the pier, sailors move at a run. Welding arcs flare like lightning. Rivets scream into place. Pumps throb deep inside the ship as thousands of tons of seawater are forced from compartments that had been flooded only days ago. Yard workers and crewmen work shoulder to shoulder, uniforms soaked through, hands blistered raw. No one talks about rest. There is no time for it. Captain Elliot Buckmaster stands on the deck, helmet tucked under his arm, eyes fixed forward. He knows what is coming. Every man here does. Somewhere west, the Japanese combined fleet is moving. And if the Yorktown is not ready, the next battle may be lost before it begins. Across the Pacific, Japanese commanders are calm, confident, certain. In Tokyo and aboard flagships at sea, intelligence summaries circulate with neat columns and reassuring conclusions. The Americans lost a carrier at Coral Sea. Another was heavily damaged. The name Yorktown appears in reports, followed by words like sunk, crippled, out of action. The estimates are repeated, refined, and accepted as fact. Aboard the flagship Yamato, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto reviews the operational plan for the coming blow against Midway. The numbers favor Japan. 4 fleet carriers will strike first. American resistance will be weak, fragmented. At most, 2 carriers might oppose them, perhaps only 1. Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, commanding the 1st Air Fleet, shares the same assumption. His confidence rests on experience. Pearl Harbor, the Indian Ocean raids. Time and again, Japanese carrier aviation has struck first and struck decisively. The enemy, slow to react, always arrives too late. The idea that a carrier smashed at Coral Sea could reappear in days is not considered. It is outside the boundaries of Japanese naval experience. Their own carriers, damaged far less severely, require months in dock. Repair doctrine emphasizes perfection, not speed. A ship returns only when fully restored, pristine, ready for the next long campaign. Back at Pearl Harbor, that philosophy is being discarded entirely. The Yorktown is scheduled for months of repair. Instead, Admiral Nimitz has given the yard a deadline of 72 hours, not to restore the ship, only to make her able to fight. Twisted steel is cut away rather than replaced. Electrical systems are rerouted through temporary cabling. Anti-aircraft guns are scavenged from other ships and bolted into place without ceremony. Holes below the waterline are sealed just well enough to survive high-speed maneuvers. Inside the ship, damage control teams rehearse again and again. They know the repairs are incomplete. They know another hit could be fatal. But they also know this carrier must sail. As the sun rises on May 31st, the impossible is happening. The Yorktown slips her moorings and heads for open water. Smoke pours from her stacks as she accelerates. Her deck crews begin moving aircraft into position. To any distant observer, she looks whole, alive, ready. Out on the Pacific, Japanese admirals remain unaware. Their calculations still subtract Yorktown from the American order of battle. Their confidence grows as Midway draws closer. The ghost they believe sunk is already steaming toward them. June 3rd, 1942. Dusk over the Philippine Sea. The 1st Air Fleet cuts through a darkening swell. 4 carriers in formation, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, on their flight decks. Crews lash down aircraft and wipe salt spray from canopies. The sea is calm enough to promise a clean launch at dawn. Over the loudspeakers, routine orders sound ordinary, almost comforting. Everything in the Japanese camp suggests inevitability. In the flag spaces aboard Akagi, Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo studies the next day's schedule. Timing is everything. The strike against Midway must be decisive. The Americans, as always, will be too slow to concentrate. Then a message arrives. Thin paper in a young officer's hands, crisp like a blade. The officer bows, steps forward and speaks quietly. It is not yet the Yorktown report. Not directly. It is something worse. The first hairline crack in certainty, a reconnaissance summary, small anomalies, American radio traffic, a hint of carriers nearby. Nagumo listens without expression, but his fingertips tighten against the edge of the table. Nearby, staff officers exchange glances. Each man has been trained to suppress doubt. Still, doubt spreads like smoke. June 4th, 1942. Dawn, North Pacific. The sky is pale gray, the horizon a thin line. On Akagi's deck, engines cough to life. Propellers blur. Deck crews crouch low as the first wave begins to roll forward. At 0430, Japanese aircraft lift into the cold air and form up, heading for Midway. Below, Nagumo watches from the bridge, binoculars raised. This is familiar. This is control. Minutes pass. Then another aircraft rises, the one meant to see what is hiding beyond the edge of the plan. A scout plane from cruiser Tone, launched late, finally claws upward and turns toward its search sector. On Midway, the Japanese strike is already finding targets, bombs bursting across airfields and fuel tanks. But the American defenders are not breaking. They are fighting back with everything that can fly. In the Japanese flagship spaces, the first reports come in. Damage inflicted. Yes, but incomplete. Midway still has aircraft. Midway still has guns. Midway will require a second strike. Nagumo's staff begins the familiar debate. The fateful argument of minutes. Should the reserve planes be rearmed with bombs for another Midway attack, or kept ready with torpedoes in case American ships appear? The plan assumes American ships will not appear in time. Then, at 7:28, the scout report crackles through the radio room, copied and carried like a live grenade into the operations center. The officer enters, bows, hands the message to the staff translator. The translator reads, and the words land heavy. Enemy sighted. 10 ships. Bearing and distance given. The message pauses, as if even the radio operator in the scout plane has to swallow what he is seeing. Then the final line. Enemy includes what appears to be a carrier. A carrier. For a moment, the room is silent except for the hum of ventilation fans and the distant thump of aircraft landing on decks. Nagumo's eyes stay on the paper. His chief of staff, Rear Admiral Ryunosuke Kusaka, leans in, reading again as if the ink might change. A carrier means the Americans are closer than expected. It means the timetable is collapsing, but it is still only one carrier. The assumption still holds. Enterprise or Hornet? Perhaps. Yorktown is gone. Another message arrives minutes later, correcting details. The scout has closed the distance. The shapes are clearer. Carrier. Type uncertain. Staff officers begin to talk. Controlled at first, then faster. If a carrier is present, the reserve strike must be armed for ships, not for Midway. But the reserve planes are already in the hangars, being rearmed for the second Midway strike. Torpedoes have been rolled away. Bomb racks are being fitted. Aviation fuel lines are open. The decks below are filling with the smell of gasoline. Nagumo makes the call to reverse the change. Rearm for ships. The order goes out. It is chaos that looks like discipline. Bombs are dragged aside. Torpedoes are hauled back. Fuses are checked, then unchecked, then checked again. Sweat runs down faces. Men shout over engines and clanging metal. And then, at 08:20, the scout plane speaks again, as if determined to break the Japanese plan into pieces. The message is read aloud in the flag plot. The enemy force includes more than one carrier, a second carrier, then a third. In the cramped room, someone exhales sharply, almost a hiss. Nagumo's expression does not change, but the stillness in his posture hardens into something else. A kind of frozen calculation. Kusaka's voice is low, edged with disbelief. Not a formal quote, not for history books, but the kind of raw reaction spoken before a man can stop himself. This is impossible. Yorktown was finished at Coral Sea. Another officer, younger, perhaps too honest, murmurs what others are thinking. If Yorktown is here, then American repairs are faster than we imagined. Much faster. In the back of the room, an intelligence officer flips through folders, searching for the report that said Yorktown was sunk or crippled beyond repair. He finds it. He stares at it. The paper suddenly feels worthless. Out on the carriers, Japanese crews keep working, unaware that a phantom has stepped onto the battlefield. The Americans have done what Japanese doctrine said could not be done. They have taken a wounded carrier and made her fight again in days. And now the realization is arriving at the worst possible moment, when decks are crowded with fueled aircraft and the sky is filling with incoming enemy planes. June 4th, 1942, 09:15, north of Midway. The ocean is slate blue, flecked with whitecaps. High above, American dive bombers cut through thin cloud layers, engines steady, pilots scanning for the dark rectangles that mean carriers. On the Japanese side, the shock has not faded. It has turned into frantic motion. In Nagumo's flag plot on Akagi, the latest contact reports are pinned to the board. Bearings, distances, headings. A staff officer traces lines with a grease pencil, trying to make a picture that makes sense. 3 carriers, possibly more. The Americans are not scrambling in from far away. They are already here, already positioned where the Japanese plan assumed empty water. Nagumo's mind returns to Coral Sea, to the confidence that Yorktown had been removed from the chessboard. That assumption has shaped everything: how quickly Japan can complete the Midway operation, how much risk can be accepted, how long the First Air Fleet can remain exposed. If the Yorktown is alive, then the Americans have cheated time. A communications officer enters, face tight, and delivers another update. The Japanese Combat Air Patrol has engaged incoming American torpedo planes. Many have been shot down. The sky is thick with dogfights, zeros streaking low, tracers arcing like sparks thrown from a grinding wheel. For a moment, it looks like Japanese skill will still prevail. Torpedo planes are slow, vulnerable. They are dying in waves. But every zero chasing torpedo planes down at sea level is a zero not watching the sky above. And every minute spent rearming aircraft below decks is a minute with fuel hoses open, bombs stacked, torpedoes rolled into place, and planes packed wingtip to wingtip. Aboard Kaga, the hangar deck is a furnace. Men sweat through uniforms, hands slick on metal casings. Bombs sit beside torpedoes in temporary piles, because the rearming order has changed twice. Fuel vapor clings to everything. The carrier is a floating magazine. On Akagi, the situation is similar. Aircraft are being prepared for a strike against the American carriers. But timing is slipping. The decks need to be cleared. The first Midway strike is returning to land and refuel. Planes come in low, landing wires snapping taut, arresting hooks screeching. Each landing adds another aircraft to the crowded deck and another delay to the launch schedule. In the command spaces, a staff officer brings up the unthinkable implication. If Yorktown is present, then American carrier strength is not 1 or 2. It is at least 3, and their coordination is tighter than expected. Another officer replies sharply, almost as if anger can erase the fact. Their repair speed is unnatural. They do not fight like we calculated. Not a polished quote. Not something that will be published. It is the kind of remark a man makes when a plan starts dying in front of him. Out beyond the Japanese formation, the carrier Yorktown moves with a quiet efficiency that feels almost mocking. Her scars are real. Beneath her paint, the steel is still wounded, but her deck crews work as if nothing happened at Coral Sea on Yorktown's bridge. Buckmaster watches the horizon through binoculars, jaw set. Below him, aircraft handlers signal with paddles, moving SBD Dauntless dive bombers into launch positions. The deck vibrates under the roar of engines. Pilots sit hunched forward, goggles down, hands on throttles. Yorktown launches her strike. This is the moment that turns Japanese disbelief into danger. It is no longer a rumor in a scout report. It is an attack wave rising from the ocean where Yorktown was supposed to be dead. In the air, Lieutenant Commander Max Leslie, leading Yorktown's dive bombers, scans for smoke. He sees it soon enough a smudge on the horizon that thickens into a column. Then the shapes emerge. Carriers. The Japanese fleet below is busy killing torpedo planes. That is what the Americans want. At 10:20, the sky above Nagumo's carriers changes. American dive bombers appear almost without warning, dropping out of the sun in steep, screaming dives. The sound is a rising howl, engines pushed to the limit, the rush of wind over wings. On Akagi's bridge, the lookout shouts. Fingers point upward. For a split second, Nagumo's staff has no words, only the instinctive understanding that the worst possible thing is happening at the worst possible time. Anti-aircraft guns open fire. Black puffs of flak bloom in the air. Tracers stitch upward. Then bombs begin to fall. On Kaga, one bomb punches through the flight deck and detonates in the hangar, where fueled aircraft are lined up. The explosion is not just a blast, it is an ignition. Flames race along spilled fuel, turning the hangar into an inferno. Planes collapse like paper. Men vanish in orange light. On Akagi, a bomb strikes near the midships area, tearing into the heart of the carrier's aviation spaces. Fire erupts. The deck shudders. Smoke pours upward, thick and choking. On Soryu, bombs hit with brutal precision, setting off chain reactions among armed aircraft. Within minutes, 3 Japanese carriers are mortally wounded. And somewhere in those first stunned seconds, as reports flood in from burning decks and men screaming into radios, the reality hits Nagumo's staff with the weight of a cannon shell. This was not supposed to happen, not with the timetable they had, not with the American strength they thought they had reduced, not if Yorktown was truly out of the war. A staff officer, voice hoarse, says what every man now understands. We planned for a fleet missing Yorktown. We are fighting a fleet that refused to lose her. The Americans have done impossible engineering. They have taken a carrier that should have been in dry dock and made her into a blade, arriving just in time to cut through Japan's best force. And the realization has come too late to matter, because the decks below are already burning. June 4th, 1942, 10:45. The sky above the Japanese formation is smeared with smoke and drifting scraps of paper that had been maps, checklists, and flight schedules only minutes earlier. Burning fuel makes the air taste bitter. On Akagi, men run with fire hoses that feel like toys against the wall of flame eating its way through the hangar. The carrier is still moving, still alive, but the heartbeat of the ship is failing. In the flag plot, the mood has shifted from disbelief to something sharper, almost personal. The Yorktown is no longer a rumor. She is a cause. A signalman repeats incoming damage reports. Kaga is ablaze. Soryu is ablaze. Akagi is hit and burning. Each message lands like a hammer strike. It is not simply that the carriers have been damaged. It is the manner of it. The Americans arrived in perfect timing, when Japanese aircraft were armed and fueled, when decks were crowded, when fighters were low. The staff knows why. They had believed the enemy was weaker. They had believed one carrier at most would arrive in time. They had believed Yorktown was gone. Vice Admiral Nagumo stands in the same spot on the bridge, but the bridge is no longer a place of control. Smoke creeps in around doorways. Men cough. The deck vibrates irregularly as damage spreads through the ship. Nagumo's Chief of Staff Kusaka moves close, speaking low, trying to keep the Admiral's mind inside the narrow lane of immediate decisions. Save the flagship. Keep command functioning. Transfer planes. Bring Hiryu into position, but even Kusaka, disciplined as he is, cannot keep the bitterness out of his voice. American repair speed, their will to force a damaged carrier back into battle. This is not the enemy the First Air Fleet was trained to crush. Down in the passageways, wounded men sit with backs against bulkheads, faces gray with smoke, eyes wide. Some stare at the deck plates as if the ship is already a grave. Up on the bridge wings, lookouts see Kaga in the distance, a dark mass with flames licking up like a crown. The carrier lists slightly, trailing thick black smoke that bends with the wind. On another bearing, Soryu is a burning wound on the ocean. For the first time since Pearl Harbor, the Japanese carrier force looks vulnerable, and the word spreads quickly through radios and shouted orders, not as a formal intelligence update, but as an accusation. Yorktown is here. A pilot from the Combat Air Patrol lands hard on Akagi, tires screeching, and climbs out with his flight suit streaked with sweat and oil. He has just watched American planes dive onto the carriers with near-perfect timing. He does not know about intelligence reports or repair schedules. He only knows the enemy is stronger than expected. He turns to a deck officer and blurts out something raw, something without ceremony. We should have finished that carrier at Coral Sea. The deck officer does not answer. There is no time. Fire crews rush past, dragging hoses and carrying wounded. On Hiryu, still intact. Captain Tomeo Kaku watches the disaster unfolding across the formation. Hiryu's flight deck is crowded with planes preparing to strike back. She has become the last blade in Nagumo's hand. Rear Admiral Taman Yamaguchi, commanding Hiryu, is calm in a way that feels dangerous. He has the look of a man who has already accepted that the battle has turned into a duel of survival. He speaks to his staff with controlled intensity. We strike now. We find their carriers. We kill them. For Yamaguchi, the appearance of Yorktown is not only a shock, it is a target. The American carrier, stitched together in Pearl Harbor, has become a symbol of everything Japan underestimated. The first Hiryu strike launches. Dive bombers and fighters race out over the sea. Climbing into the gray sky, their radios crackle with bearings and range. They find an American carrier and dive. It is Yorktown. From the American perspective, the moment is almost unreal. Yorktown's deck crew sees enemy planes coming out of the clouds, wings rocking as they line up. General quarters blares. Men sprint to stations. Anti-aircraft guns elevate and begin firing. Shells bursting in black clusters. Yorktown turns hard to starboard, her hull carving a white curve through the water. Japanese bombs fall. One hits near the stack area, exploding with a concussive slam. Another detonates nearby. The ship shakes. Lights flicker. Smoke surges. But Yorktown does not die. Damage control teams rush in with practiced speed, sealing compartments, fighting fire. They have rehearsed this since leaving Pearl Harbor because they knew the repairs were incomplete. The wounded carrier was built to endure one more blow. And she does. Within an hour, Yorktown's flight deck is functioning again. Planes are moved. Fuel lines run. Signals flash. On Hiryu, when the strike leader reports results, The tone is confused, then angry. They saw bomb hits. They saw explosions. They expected the carrier to stop. Instead, she keeps moving. The reaction on Hiryu is not a neat quotation, not the kind of thing recorded for later. It is the kind of strained, almost incredulous remark that passes between officers in the combat information spaces. How does that ship still operate? She was supposed to be crippled. Yamaguchi's response is cold. Then we hit her again. A second strike is assembled. Torpedo planes this time, loaded and fueled, engines warming. The pilots climb into cockpits knowing that somewhere out there is a carrier that refuses to stay wounded. When the torpedo planes find Yorktown, they come in low, skimming the waves. Yorktown's gunners open fire, water splashing around the attackers, tracers reaching out. Torpedoes hit. 2 explosions bloom along Yorktown's port side. The ship lurches. Machinery spaces flood. Power fails. The carrier slows, then stops, dead in the water. For a moment, Japanese airmen believe the ghost is finally finished. Back on the burning Japanese carriers, word comes in that one American carrier has been brought to a halt. Relief flickers. It is small, but it is something. Yet even this does not erase the bitter truth. Yorktown had been present. She had launched strikes. She had helped destroy 3 Japanese carriers before being stopped. She had already done the damage that mattered. The impossible repair at Pearl Harbor did not just put another ship into the battle. It altered the balance at the exact moment Japanese doctrine needed the enemy to be absent. In Nagumo's spaces, as the flagship struggles with fire and smoke, an officer sums it up in a voice that sounds like blame. We fought the wrong Midway. We fought the Midway where Yorktown was dead. Outside, the ocean reflects burning light. The battle continues, but the First Air Fleet has already been cut open. June 4th, 1942. Afternoon. The sea around Yorktown is littered with debris, oily foam, and drifting pieces of aircraft. The carrier lies motionless, listing slightly, her once busy deck now scarred and quiet. Smoke still curls from damaged sections. Men move carefully, voices low, as if loud sounds might break what little stability remains. Captain Buckmaster stands on the bridge, staring out at the horizon where the battle has already decided itself. They do not yet know every detail, but they can feel the shift. Japanese air power is fading. The sky has fewer enemy planes. The radio traffic is changing tone. American confidence is rising in the clipped voices coming through headsets. Yorktown's damage control crews fight for their ship like men defending a living thing. They work pumps and patch ruptures. They rig emergency power. They drag hoses through hot passageways. They are exhausted. But they are practiced. The Coral Sea has already taught them what a carrier looks like when it is bleeding. Nearby, American destroyers circle like guard dogs, scanning for submarines, dropping the occasional depth charge that thumps through the hull as a dull reminder that danger still surrounds them. Out to the west, the Japanese fleet is in retreat, and what remains of its carrier force is reduced to one wounded survivor, Hiryu, now isolated, hunted. On the Japanese side, the day has turned into a nightmare of reports that cannot be undone. On Akagi, where smoke turns the corridors into choking tunnels, messages are still passed by hand because radios fail or lines are cut. Men stumble over bodies. Officers try to maintain posture even as heat warps metal around them. The carrier that once led triumphant formations now drifts, wounded beyond saving. In the flag plot, someone is still trying to reconstruct what happened, to force the chaos into a sequence that can be understood. The pattern is becoming clear, and it is cruel. 3 American carriers were present. They struck when Japanese decks were crowded and armed. They arrived because the Americans knew the plan, or guessed it correctly, or simply had better positioning. But beneath all of that is the fact that has begun to spread like a stain in every surviving Japanese command space. Yorktown was not supposed to exist in this battle. The intelligence failure is no longer theoretical. It has a body. It has a flight deck. It has bombs that fell onto Kaga and Soryu and Akagi while Japanese officers still believed they were fighting a weaker enemy. In the hours after the initial catastrophe, Japanese staff officers begin asking questions that sound like accusations, even when they are phrased politely. Who confirmed Yorktown was out of action? How did we accept that report so completely? What did the Americans do at Pearl Harbor? A senior officer. Face streaked with soot. Answers in a flat voice that is more judgment than explanation. They did not repair her properly. They repaired her fast. They did not care if it was perfect. They cared if she could fight. That idea, simple and brutal, lands hard in a culture built on careful preparation and meticulous standards. It is not that Japanese engineers are incapable. It is that doctrine does not reward a half-fixed ship sent back into battle. It rewards readiness as a finished state. The Americans have treated readiness like a gamble, and they won. Farther back in the Japanese command chain, the shock reaches Admiral Yamamoto. His battleships are too far to intervene. The Midway plan depended on carriers to draw out and destroy the American fleet. Instead, the carriers are dying first. A staff officer on Yamamoto's flagship brings forward summaries of the engagement. Yamamoto reads them with the same intense stillness he used when he planned this operation. But now, the stillness is heavy. At some point, someone mentions Yorktown explicitly, and the room pauses. The name is no longer a ship. It is a mistake. If Yorktown had truly been sunk at Coral Sea, the American carrier force at Midway might have been reduced enough for Japanese air power to dominate. It might have changed the entire opening balance. It might have given Nagumo the margin of error he needed. But Yorktown lived, and because she lived, she contributed to the timing that destroyed 3 Japanese carriers before Hiryu could deliver more than a brief reprieve. Even now, as Japanese commanders absorb the truth, there is nothing they can do with it. It is not information that can be used. It is information that only explains how they have already been cut. On Hiryu, the last surviving Japanese carrier, the mood is desperate. Planes return from strikes with losses. Fuel is low. Pilots report American fighters everywhere. The carrier turns and weaves, trying to avoid the inevitable counterattack. Then it comes. American dive bombers find Hiryu and fall on her like the earlier strikes fell on Kaga and Akagi. Bombs hit. Fires spread. The ship becomes another burning island. As Hiryu's fate seals itself, the Japanese carrier force ceases to exist as a coherent weapon. And the bitter irony is that the truth about Yorktown, the thing that shook Japanese commanders so deeply, arrives when the battle is already decided. It arrives too late to change any order, too late to shift any formation, too late to adjust any launch schedule. It only changes how the survivors will remember the day. Back near Yorktown, the carrier is still floating. Buckmaster and his officers believe she can be saved. Salvage plans are discussed. Towing arrangements are considered. Men return to work, because this ship has already defied expectations once. But the sea is not finished with her. June 6, 1942. Early morning. The water around Yorktown is deceptively calm. A Japanese submarine, unseen, has been stalking. Periscope low, torpedo tubes ready. The first torpedo hits the destroyer Hammond alongside Yorktown. The explosion is violent, ripping the smaller ship apart. Secondary blasts follow as depth charges detonate. The shockwave batters Yorktown, adding new damage to old wounds. More torpedoes strike Yorktown. The carrier shudders. The list increases. Compartments that were patched begin to fail. Men scramble again. But this time, the math is different. The repairs that made her fight were never meant to hold against repeated underwater hits. By June 7th, Yorktown finally rolls and sinks into the Pacific. Even in death, she feels stubborn. She stayed long enough to change history. And on the Japanese side, the admirals and staff who survived will carry a lesson that tastes like ash. They misjudged American capacity. They underestimated American improvisation. They believed time was on their side. Then a carrier that should have been crippled showed up fully operational, and the First Air Fleet burned for it. June 7th, 1942. Pacific Ocean. The water closes over the last visible edge of Yorktown's hull, swallowing steel, smoke stains, and the stubborn proof that she ever existed. The sea looks calm again, indifferent, almost gentle. But the calm is a lie. Beneath it lies the wreckage of 2 carrier fleets and the shattered assumptions of men who had built an empire on timing. For the Americans, Yorktown's sinking is a tragedy that carries a strange kind of triumph. She fought when she should not have been able to fight. She arrived at Midway when the enemy believed her dead. She helped smash the core of Japanese carrier strength. And only afterward did the ocean finally take her. For the Japanese, the feeling is harder to name. It is anger, disbelief, and a cold dread about what kind of war this has become. In the days after Midway, surviving Japanese officers talk among themselves in mess spaces and temporary headquarters, away from radios and official records. Their tone is different than in briefings. It is quieter, edged with shame, because the cause is not simply American luck or American bravery. It is Japanese certainty that proved wrong. They had trusted the Coral Sea assessment. They had accepted that Yorktown was sunk or crippled beyond repair. That belief shaped decisions before the battle and decisions during the battle. And when the scout report hinted at multiple American carriers, the realization hit like a sudden drop in altitude. Yorktown is alive. The reactions were not theatrical. They were the kind of words men say when the ground under their feet vanishes. Some officers reacted with blunt disbelief, repeating the intelligence line as if saying it again might make it true. Yorktown was finished. Others reacted with professional irritation that sounded like rage. Then the report was wrong. We paid for it. And among the carrier aviators, the ones who had watched American decks keep launching planes even after they believed those decks had been crippled, the comments turned into something almost superstitious. That ship would not die. Informal Japanese discussions. The language becomes more careful, but the meaning remains sharp. The Americans demonstrated an industrial and organizational flexibility the Japanese had not properly weighed. They did not insist on perfect restoration. They made a damaged carrier combat capable quickly and sent her back into the fight. That single difference, perfection versus speed, became a turning point. Because Yorktown did not need to be flawless to matter. She only needed to be present. Japanese planners had assumed attrition would work the way it worked in their own system. Damage removes a ship for a long time. A carrier hit hard is gone for months. Under that assumption, Coral Sea had reduced American strength. Under that assumption, Midway would be fought against fewer carriers. But the Americans treated time like a weapon. They turned a shipyard into a battlefield. They used patchwork engineering as strategy. When Japanese officers came to understand that, they also came to understand the deeper implication. If the Americans could do this with Yorktown, they could do it again. That thought lands like a shadow over every later Japanese operation. It means you cannot rely on damage alone. You must destroy completely. It means you cannot assume your enemy will recover slowly. You must assume recovery will be faster than you expect. It is not just a lesson about one carrier. It is a lesson about a war between 2 different kinds of systems. And so, the comments from the surviving Japanese command circles drift into a common theme, repeated in different voices, different rooms, different days. We underestimated their capacity. We believed our own reports. We thought time belonged to us. The most painful truth is that the realization came at the worst possible time, when it could not alter the outcome. It arrived when decks were already crowded with armed planes and fuel vapor, when Zeros were low chasing torpedo planes, when American dive bombers were already rolling over into their dives. By the time Yorktown's presence became undeniable, Kaga was already burning. Soryu was already burning. Akagi was already burning. The correct understanding arrived only to explain why they were losing, and that is why. In Japanese memory of Midway, Yorktown becomes more than a ship. She becomes the symbol of a miscalculation, the carrier they wrote off, the carrier they believed eliminated, became one of the blades that cut down the heart of their carrier fleet. Back at Pearl Harbor, the shipyard workers who had welded through the night and slept in snatches on concrete floors did not see Japanese admirals in smoke-filled rooms. They did not hear the muttered disbelief or the bitter anger. But their work traveled across the ocean and spoke for them. It said this: a ship does not have to be perfect to be lethal. It only has to be ready in time. And at Midway, the Yorktown was ready.